appeal to authority. You see this bias all the time. He's a doctor. He knows what he's talking about. He's a scientist, this, that, whatever. He's not a doctor. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not a scientist. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a politician. Let's just blindly follow him. I don't know if that applies here, but that's what most people think. I got this comment that was on one of our videos about the carnivore diet. Should I eat plants, good, bad, the ugly? And I want to talk about it real quick. This appeal to authority, this idea that credentials, that schooling or whatever, somehow gives you instant credibility is completely flawed. I've actually been writing about this, thinking about this lately, about how experts in a given field are less likely to be able to assimilate new information because of the status quo bias and a bunch of other things. There's this saying, it's don't expect a man to understand something when his salary depends on not understanding it. Upton Sinclair said that. When it comes to experts, even scientists, I did a piece recently that shows that there's a strong bias to not disagree with other scientists because the idea that it could be bad for your career or you couldn't get published in certain journals, somebody doesn't like you, whatever. Science, like anything else, has certain institutions and standards or whatever, and they tend to fall into patterns that become widely accepted. And when you come in with conflicting ideas, it's really hard to bust through that. Because think about it. If you've been publishing a journal for years and you've published 50 papers yourself for years as a scientist, and then something comes out that basically says like most of your research is completely wrong or backwards, like if you've been promoting low-fat diet, high-carb diet for years, and then a lot of the new research is showing that that might have been wrong, what incentive do you have to come out and say, oh, well, I was wrong? You don't. You actually have a reverse incentive where you want to maintain the status quo as long as possible. You want to just kind of maybe change your mind in secret. Maybe just like start publishing a few things here and there, and then maybe eventually change your tune. Or as Planck's principle, which is this idea, I think he was a scientist, but he looked at the body of scientific research over the years, and what he realized and what is known as Planck's principle is the idea that most scientific progress does not happen because current scientists change their mind. Most scientific progress happens when the current generation of scientists that have a certain belief system, usually somewhere supporting the status quo, the established belief system, when those people die out, science progresses because a new generation comes up with more open mind, and thus new scientific ideas are adopted. It's sometimes referred to, tongue-in-cheek, as scientific progress happens one funeral at a time. Look at the politicians, look at the lobbying, look at the research that's funded, that has been funded, that's been done over the last 40, 50 years. And you'll see the obesity epidemic. You'll see the exact reason why heart disease is the number one killer, cancer is number two. We're talking 1.2 million deaths a year right there. Medical errors, 350,000. That's just added on top. And then you can keep going down. And you can find diabetes, and you'll see Alzheimer's on that list, which they're calling type 3 diabetes. Blindly trusting experts, or even partly trusting experts at this point. Anyone that maintains the current understanding, that supports the current status quo, unless that current status quo is universally amazing with no side effects and whatever, then maybe I could say you could follow along or support or whatever, but we can look at the system. We can look at the fact that America is sick, it's obese. Processed food is the standard rather than the exception. You don't have to look far to see how broken it is. Sick care rather than health care, big pharma, food lobbying, big processed food companies, mass monocropping. This appeal to authority and this desire to want to be told from some expert, it's one of the weakest biases of the human mind. It's one of the weakest. And it's lazy thinking. And people want to do it because they want to save time or whatever. But I can tell you right now, doctors in the early 1900s, and all the way back the further you go, were very suspect. A lot of times you go to a doctor, they'd kill you. They'd use leeches or they'd bloodlet you. And basically that's how George Washington died, because he got a fever or something, and then they bloodlet him and he basically bled him to death. All these really bad ideas that in every generation of doctors or scientists, whatever, they pretty much all think they know what's what, right? Because that's what they do. So they maintain that status quo. And then only by those people eventually dying off, new ideas come in. What makes us think 2020 is any different? The current generation of scientists that have been propping up the status quo, that have been propping up the low-fat, high-carb dogma, whether on purpose or on accident because they're literally paid to, or they just don't know any better and they're just following the herd. All humans succumb to groupthink in one form or the other. And when you're in a certain industry, and there are certain ways you do things, and there are certain gatekeepers, it only further solidifies the status quo being maintained. And that's where the danger comes from. So I'll take the independent, curious researcher, the self-experimenter any day of the week over an industry expert. When you actually understand the incentives that are at play and how their salary could be dependent on not seeking truth, you see how the appeal to authority is so dangerous and absurd. It's why we have the political landscape that we have right now. It's why corporatism has infected politics. Now corporations and government are basically like this. It's why you have food lobbying and this and that. It's like, none of these are conspiracies either. If you go deep into them, you'll find some conspiracies, and maybe some of them will be a little wonky in what they're suggesting. But you can take a step back from just what's readily available, the way we know things work, pharmaceutical, food companies, lobbying, all these different things, super PACs. It's all not a conspiracy. It's literally what's happening. Like if an alien came and looked at the evolution of America, looked at all the defining points and looked at like what happened after World War I and II and III and 9/11 and the erosion of rights and all these things, that alien would probably just think like, wow, you guys are just being played. And you just gobble it up. And back to the point about the scientists and the doctors, corporations are largely responsible for the blind trust in the medical establishment, doctors and scientists and experts. Why? Because they've been hiring them and spending billions and billions of dollars on marketing to make it so that you trust doctors and you don't really ask a lot of questions and you take the pill or the surgery or whatever they recommend. And thus the big pharmaceutical companies benefit because it's not actually healthcare, it's sick care. So you stay addicted to those drugs forever. What better business model than to hire these basically puppets? And so let me say, just real quick, most people in the medical establishment are trying to help people. They're not evil, and most of them are just stuck in a system that's broken. Some just turn a blind eye faster than others. Some might speak out, like Ken Berry, for example, and say things that are not popular. Sean Baker, for example, he lost his medical license over some nonsense, mostly because he was speaking out, things like that. He got it back, I'm pretty sure. But very few people are willing to do that because usually their salary depends on not doing it. Okay, so this appeal to authority, let's read it real quick. Does this guy have any scientific training? I feel like most of the carnivore YouTube dudes, like this guy, Carnivore Kurt, and the other hippie dude, just follow along with people with actual credentials in this movement. Pretty much just Paul and Sean. I would love some actual data and citations. It's not nuanced. Humans are omnivores. It's pretty simple. Meat is more available, but we don't have carnivore guts. It reflects on omnivores. Also, as another commenter noted, animals are not close to the animals our ancestors ate. Even if they were grass-fed, they've been bred to have much more fat over thousands of years. Same with plants. I'm not saying you're wrong, but some actual evidence would be great. Also, state your credentials before giving guidelines. Some people take average Joe's advice seriously. And as I just stated, well before we got to this, typically the innovators are the average Joes. The people that move things forward, that come and disrupt things, whether that's entrepreneurs, whether that's thinkers, whether that's inventors, these are almost always the people operating outside of the establishment, outside of the status quo. That's where you get innovation. This doesn't bother me. This video is actually not even about me at all. I don't care if you listen to my advice at all. Most of what I'm just doing is talking about things that have worked for me and things I've observed and literally the hundreds of experts I've interviewed and talked to. And I've actually interviewed Paul Saladino, Sean Baker, Michaela Peterson. We have Ken Berry's actually coming on the show soon. I'm just trying to think. I had Carnivore Court on. I had Kevin Sock. He's been doing Carnivore for a while. And a bunch of other episodes that I've done. I've also been following this stuff for myself for 13 years now when I first got into CrossFit and paleo. The more data I accumulate, the more people I talk to, the more I experiment at myself now 6 months into carnivore and feeling amazing, the best results of my life, feeling the best of my life, basically curing my back pain for the most part by eating a carnivore-based diet. The more data I accumulate, the more I see through all the nonsense. And then when you actually look into science, when you look into the medical establishment, pharma, all these different things, you see how much of these, what I call accidental conspiracies, are all in bed together. They're in bed with maintaining the way things are because there's billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in maintaining the way things are. There's not a lot of money in going to small family farms and buying local and eating meat versus like mass-produced junk food that's easy to turn a profit on. It's all connected. I don't care if somebody thinks I need credentials or whatever. I do care, though, if people blindly follow experts and they don't question the status quo and they use appeal to authority, they fall victim to that bias because look at what's happening in 2020. Face masks, social distancing, which was actually invented by the CDA, not good for you, face masks. No research even shows that it works. And people are just falling in line like sheep. It's affected me. I went to the gym yesterday. I had them interrupt my game of racquetball 6 times, going back and forth about wearing a mask while I'm playing a high-intensity sport. And then code enforcement from Texas, from the city of Austin, apparently walked through. And so they basically said, unless you're 12 feet apart, even though you have a health condition for not wearing a mask, we have to shut it down. Like, never would I have thought that the government would intervene in my private life the way it has. I haven't seen it in my entire lifetime. It's what's made me nervous about the future for America. I'm not going to get into that today. If you want to learn more about that, go over to the Shut No One Cares, Get Back to Work podcast. I got tons of shows on that. I'm putting out a show like every other day there. So if you like any of my content, go check that out. But for now, this appeal to authority, this blind trust of the medical establishment and doctors, whatever, is a very dangerous proposition. Before people could question Hitler, before they really kind of took him even seriously, he already had all the power he needed. And then the average German is kind of scratching their head like, what the heck just happened? I can't say anything now because the Gestapo will come and basically murder me and my family. So I have to just kind of go along with the ride. That is why the appeal to authority is so dangerous. And that is why, because it's literally affected me as an American citizen. And this has always been affecting me because look at my health insurance shouldn't be as expensive as it is. It is because of other people in sick care that don't take care of their health, that listen to doctors and that tell them, eat low fat, don't eat red meat. I literally pay for that. My family suffers because of that. Now, I'm here to help people try to avoid that. That's why I do what I do. That's why I put out these videos. That's why I spend time doing this. It is my mission to wake people up, help them see through all of it, the status quo, the matrix, whatever you want to call it. It's a lot of nonsense. The danger of appeal to authority, I hope I analyze there. Also, just real quick about this, I'll leave this up. You can, at the end of the video, if you want to read the whole thread, go for it. I'm not going to read right now, but I replied, he actually says humans are omnivores, it's pretty simple. He says that we don't have carnivore guts. We actually have beyond carnivore guts in some cases. Our acid level in our gut is about the same as a buzzard. What do buzzards eat? Dead, rotting animals. The theory for this is, one of the theories, is that we would have hunted these huge megafauna, right? Like mammoths, giant sloths, all these things that have basically been extinct either through environmental pressure and or human hunting to extinction, which we have hunted a lot of animals to extinction. Some people try to deny that, but I call BS on that. You can find, areas where there's a cliff and we would run literally herds of buffalo off a cliff, probably more than we could even eat. And just below, there'd be like thousands and thousands of these buffalo or bison or large land animals that would be pushed off a cliff, run off a cliff, and then die, and we probably couldn't even eat all the meat. But the reason that we have the same acid level as a buzzard is to kill the microbes that would grow in the meat or the megafauna or the mammoth or whatever over the course of weeks or months, because we would then eat it over that course period of time as well. So we invariably ate rotting meat. If you actually think about what is rotting vegetables is basically a form of fermentation. You can even ferment animal foods. They're usually not very tasty, so you don't find them very commercially available. You see how these are all kind of sticking together? The theory of alcohol is that there was honey that was dripping into maybe a tree that had water, stagnant water, and then so the honey dripped, the sugar, and then fermentation, and that created like a kind of honey wine. And then when we figured out that, and it was amazing to us and we loved it, then, there's a lot of theories around like that's one of the reasons we might have started farming, because we wanted access to alcohol year round. So we wanted to grow plant foods to ferment them to make beer and whatever. Really fascinating stuff. But when you really go deep and look into all this, things that 99.99% of doctors, scientists, whatever, have no clue about, they don't study, they don't research, they don't even look into it, you start getting a broader picture of how all the things work. It's like Charlie Munger. He talks about how knowledge is kind of a lattice work that it connects, almost like neurons. Like the more you create them, the more you get this exponential understanding, a broad understanding of everything, of a lot of things. And that's why I spend so much time on first principles. First principles, I'm going to end this video now because it's going on longer than usual, but some of the first principles as it relates to evolutionary biology and psychology or whatever is that we didn't start farming before 12,000 years ago. This is without a doubt. In that hunter-gatherer way of life, we would have eaten a combination of all foods from the plant and animal kingdom. But where most of our nutrition would have came from would have been from animal foods, because they have the omegas, they have the B vitamins, they have things that you literally can't find in the plant kingdom. And even if a modern day plant-based vegan would talk to you today about you can get B12 from soil or whatever, it's not the same bioavailable form. But besides that, you can't maintain in a hunter-gatherer wild context without machinery and modern food processing. You cannot survive on plant foods in nature. You could survive on plant foods plus supplementation in a modern industrialized food supply system. Of course, people do it all the time. I don't think they're optimal, and a lot of them have health problems, but you can definitely do it. Go in the wild, though, if it means death or survival, Even the most staunch plant-based animal lover, non-animal eater person will eat animals and wild. They will crave it. Their base biology will take over, and you show them anything, they'll grab a squirrel and eat it freaking raw probably if you got to a certain point. I know I'm getting a little bit off tangent, but this is the danger of appealing to authority. This is the danger of blindly trusting scientists and whatever's common knowledge. And also something that I've learned over the years that I've been thinking about a lot lately. There's a heuristic you can use. It's just a quick one. You shouldn't use it to make life or death decisions. You should investigate. But there's a variable that you should always consider to maintain your skepticism of most things. It is this. The more likely something is understood by the masses or is established status quo, the more likely it is to be wrong. In most cases, backwards. The more people believe something, right? The more people believe here, the less likely it is to be true. I don't know why this is. It's probably a combination of human nature, consolidation of power, our history of civilization and personal property, and all these crazy complex things. There's a lot of reasons for it, but it is. As Mark Twain said, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. I'm gonna leave the full comment thread right here. Pause it if you wanna read it. Subscribe, share, like, whatever you wanna do. I hope to see you in the next one. Hey, Colin here. Got a freebie for you. Click on the button below to go to the ancestralmind.com and download the 7 Principles of Living Wild. This is a short PDF that's got some of the main principles, such as real food, sleep, movement, and a couple more that are going to help you live more ancestrally in accordance with your genes.